Hello there. How are you? I hope you're all very well. And my name is Gildart, and I'm an actor, and I'm an audiobook narrator, and I'm also a fireside reader. It's a new thing. I read classic old books to you as I sit in front of the fire. Sort of like they did in the old days. Many of these books were written actually to be read by the family in front of the fire, somebody reading out loud. And now I'm sort of doing the same thing, but on the end of the internet, and I'm very grateful for you joining me. We are currently reading Dracula, which I think is a really wonderfully exciting book. And last chapter, we met some new characters. Initially, the first 4 chapters are just Jonathan Harker visiting Count Dracula. Jonathan Harker's a solicitor, a solicitor's clerk, but actually he's just qualified to be a solicitor. And he's gone to explain to Count Dracula in Transylvania the details of a real estate transaction his firm have made for him. The Count is buying a house in England. Well, in last chapter, we met the person to whom Jonathan has been writing his diary entries, his betrothed, Mina Harker. She has a best friend, Lucy Westenra, and Lucy, I think, is probably very beautiful, and she received 3 invitations to marriage on the same day from 3 men who, rather coincidentally, all know one another. Perhaps that was the way these things happened back then. Arthur Holmgren is the winner. He is the one that Lucy is in love with. There is also the doctor. I forgot what his name is. We meet him again today. What is his name? Dr. Seward. And there is the American, Mr. Morris. Well, now we move on to chapter 6. Welcome to a fireside reading of Dracula. Chapter 6. Nina Murray's journal. 24th of July, Whitby. Lucy met me at the station, looking sweeter and lovelier than ever, and we drove up to the house at the Crescent in which they have rooms. This is a lovely place. The little river, the Esk, runs through a deep valley which broadens out as it comes near the harbour. A great viaduct runs across with high piers through which the view seems somehow further away than it really is. The valley is beautifully green, and it is so steep that when you're on the highland on either side, you look right across it, unless you're near enough to see down. The houses of the old town, the side away from us, are all red-roofed and seem piled up, one over the other anyhow, like the pictures we see of Nuremberg. Right over the town is the ruin of Whitby Abbey, which was sacked by the Danes and which is the scene of part of Marmion, where the girl was built up in the wall. It is a most noble ruin of immense size and full of beautiful and romantic bits. There is a legend that a white lady is seen in one of the windows. Between it and the town there is another church, the parish one, round which is a big graveyard, all full of tombstones. This is, to my mind, the nicest spot in Whitby, for it lies right over the town and has a full view of the harbour and all up the bay to where the headland, called Kettleness, stretches out into the sea. It descends so steeply over the harbour that part of the bank has fallen away, and some of the graves have been destroyed. In one place, part of the stonework of the graves stretches out over the sandy pathway far below. There are walks with seats beside them through the churchyard, and people go and sit there all day long looking at the beautiful view and enjoying the breeze. I shall come here and sit very often myself and work. Indeed, I am writing now with my book on my knee and listening to the talk of 3 old men who are sitting beside me. They seem to do nothing all day but sit up here and talk. The harbour lies below me, with on the far side one long granite wall stretching out into the sea, with a curve outwards at the end of it, in the middle of which is a lighthouse. A heavy sea wall runs along outside of it. On the near side, the sea wall makes an elbow crooked inversely, and its end, too, has a lighthouse. Between the 2 piers there is a narrow opening in the harbour, which then suddenly widens. It is nice at high water, but when the tide is out, it shoals away to nothing, and there is merely the stream of the Esk running between banks of sand with rocks here and there. Outside the harbour on this side there rises for about half a mile a great reef, the sharp edge of which runs straight out from behind the south lighthouse. At the end of it is a buoy with a bell, which swings in bad weather and sends in a mournful sound on the wind. They have a legend here that when a ship is lost, bells are heard out at sea. I must ask the old man about this. He is coming this way. He is a funny old man. He must be awfully old, for his face is all gnarled and twisted like the bark of a tree. He tells me that he is nearly 100, and that he was a sailor in the Greenland fishing fleet when Waterloo was fought. He is, I am afraid, a very sceptical person, for when I asked him about the bells at sea and the White Lady at the Abbey, he said very brusquely, "I wouldn't fush muzzle about them, miss. Them things be all wore out. Mind, I don't say that they never was, but I do say that they wasn't in my time. They be all very well for comers and trippers and the like, but not for a nice young lady like you. Them feet folks from York and Leeds that be always eating cured herrings and drinking tea and looking out to buy cheap jet would creed aught. I wonder, Massel, who'd be bothered telling 'em lies like that. Even the newspapers, which is full of fool talk." I thought he would be a good person to learn interesting things from, so I asked him if he would mind telling me something about the whale fishing in the old days. He was just settling himself to begin when the clock struck 6, whereupon he laboured to get up and said, "I must gang again woods home now, miss. My granddaughter doesn't like to be kept waiting when the tea is ready, for it takes me time to crammel a moon the grease, for there be a many of 'em, and miss, I lack belly timber surely by the clock." He hobbled away, and I could see him hurrying as well as he could down the steps. The steps are a great feature on the place. They lead from the town up to the church. There are hundreds of them. I do not know how many, and they wind up in a delicate curve. The slope is so gentle that a horse could easily walk up and down them. I think they must originally have had something to do with the Abbey. I shall go home too. Lucy went out visiting with her mother, and as they were on only duty calls, I did not go. They will be home by this. 1st of August. I came up here an hour ago with Lucy, and we had a most interesting talk with my old friend and the 2 others who always come and join him. He is evidently the Sir Oracle of them, and I should think must have been in his time a most dictatorial person. He will not admit anything and down faces everybody. If he can't out-argue them, he bullies them and then takes their silence for agreement with his views. Lucy was looking sweetly pretty in her white lawn frock. She has got a beautiful colour since she's been here. I noticed that the old men did not lose any time in coming up and sitting near her when we sat down. She is so sweet with old people. I think they all fell in love with her on the spot. Even my old man succumbed and did not contradict her, but gave me double share instead. I got him on the subject of the legends, and he went off at once into a sort of sermon. I must try to remember it and put it down.
It be all fool talk, lock, stock and barrel. That's what it be, and nowt else. Then bonds and wafts and bow ghosts and bar guests and bogles, and all anent them is only fit to set bairns and dizzy women a belder. They be nowt but air blebs. They, and all grims and signs and warnings, be all invented by parsons and ilsome buke bodies and railway touters to scare and scunner halflings, and to get folks to do something that they don't other inclined to. It makes me ireful to think of them. Why, it's them that, not content with printing lies in paper and preaching them out of pupils, does want to be cutting them on the tombstones. Look here, all around you, in what earth you will. All them stearns, holding up their heads as well as they can out of their pride, is a cant still tumbling down with the weight of the lies wrote on 'em. Here lies the body, or sacred to the memory, wrote on all of them, and yet and nigh half of them there bean't no bodies at all. And the memories of them bean't cared a pinch of snuff about, much less sacred. Lies, all of them, nothing but lies of one kind or another. My gog, but I'll be a queer scoudament at the day of judgment when they come tumbling up in their death sarks, all drooped together and trying to drag their tombstones with them to prove how good they was, some of them trimling and dithering with their hands that dozened and slippery from lying in the sea that they can't even keep their grip on 'em.
I could see from the old fellow's self-satisfied air and the way in which he looked round for the approval of his cronies that he was showing off. So I put in a word to keep him going. "Oh, Mr. Swales, you can't be serious. Surely these tombstones are not all wrong."
"Yablins! There may be a poorish few not wrong, saving where they make out the people too good, but there be folk that do think a balm bowl be like the sea, if only it be their own. The whole thing be only lies. Now, look you here. You come here a stranger, and you see this Kirkgarth."
I nodded, for I thought it better to assent, though I did not quite understand his dialect. I knew it had something to do with the church.
He went on, "And you consait that all these stearns be aboon folk that be happen here, snod and snog."
I assented again.
"Then that be just where the lie comes in. Why, there be scores of these lay beds that be tomb as old duns back a box on Friday night."
He nudged one of his companions, and they all laughed.
"And my gog, how could they be otherwise? Look at that one, the aftest abaft the beer bank. Read it."
I went and read. "Edward Spencelar, master mariner, murdered by pirates off the coast of Andres, April 1854, 8:30. When I came back, Mr. Swales went on.
"Who brought him home, I wonder? I wonder to hap him here, murdered off the coast of Andres, and you conceited his body lay under? Why, I could name you a dozen whose bones lie in the Greenland seas above." He pointed northwards, "or where the currents may have drifted them. There be the stearns around ye. You can, with your young eyes, read the small print of the lies from here. This Braithwaite Lowry, I knew his father, lost in the lively off Greenland in 20. Or Andrew Woodhouse, drowned in the same seas in 1777. Or John Paxton, drowned off Cape Farewell a year later. Or old John Rawlins, whose grandfather sailed with me, drowned in the Gulf of Finland in 50. Do you think that all these men will have to make a rush to Whitby when the trumpet sounds? I have my antherums about it. I tell you that when they got there, they'd be jommeling and jostling one another that way that it'd be like a fight up on the ice in the old days, when we'd be at one another from daylight to dark and trying to tie up our cuts by the light of the aurora borealis.
This was evidently local pleasantry, for the old man cackled over it, and his cronies joined in with gusto. But, I said, surely you aren't quite correct, for you start on the assumption that all the poor people, or their spirits, will have to take their tombstones with them on the day of judgment. Do you think that will be really necessary?
Well, what else be they tombstones for? Answer me that, miss.
To please their relatives, I suppose.
To please their relatives, you suppose? This he said with intense scorn. How will it pleasure their relatives to know that lies is wrote over them, and that everybody in the place knows that they be lies? He pointed to a stone at our feet, which had been laid down as a slab on which the seat was rested, close to the edge of the cliff. Read the lies on that Thrustian, he said.
The letters were upside down to me from where I sat, but Lucy was more opposite them, so she leant over and read. Sacred to the memory of George Cannon, who died in the hope of a glorious resurrection on July the 29th, 1873, falling from the rocks of Kettleness. This tomb was erected by his sorrowing mother to her dearly beloved son. He was the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Really, Mr. Swales, I don't see anything funny in that. She spoke her comment very gravely and somewhat severely.
You don't see aught funny? Ha ha! But that's because you don't gorm the sorrowing mother was a hellcat that hated him because he was a crooked. A regular lammeter he was, and he hated her so that he committed suicide in order that she mightn't get an insurance she put on his life. He blew nigh the top of his head off with an old musket that they had for scaring the crows with. 'Twarn't for screws then, for it brought the clegs and the doups to him. That's the way he fell off the rocks. And as to hopes of a glorious resurrection, I've often heard him say, Mazel, that he hoped he'd go to hell, for his mother was so pious that she'd be sure to go to heaven, and he didn't want to addle where she was. Now, isn't that steeing at any rate? He hammered it with his stick as he spoke. A pack of lies. And won't it make Gabriel keggle when Geordie comes panting up the grease with the tombstone balanced on his hump and asks if it be took as evidence?
I did not know what to say, but Lucy turned the conversation as she said, rising up, "Oh, why did you tell us of this? It is my favourite seat, and I cannot leave it. And now I find I must go on sitting over the grave of a suicide."
That won't harm you, my pretty, and it may make poor Geordie gladsome to have so trim a lass sitting on his lap. That won't hurt ye. Why, I've sat here often nigh on 20 years past, and it hasn't done me no harm. Don't ye fash about them as lies under ye, or that doesn't lie there either, for it'll be time for ye to be getting scart when ye see the tombstones all run away with, and the place as bare as a stubble field. There's the clock, and I must be going. My service to ye, ladies.
And he hobbled off. Lucy and I sat a while, and it was all so beautiful before us that we took hands as we sat. And she told me all over again about Arthur and their coming marriage. That made me just a little heartsick, for I haven't heard from Jonathan for a whole month. The same day, I came up here alone, for I'm very sad. There was no letter for me, I hope there cannot be anything the matter with Jonathan. The clock has just struck 9. I see the lights scattered all over the town, sometimes in rows where the streets are, sometimes singly. They run right up the Esk and die away in the curve of the valley. To my left, the view is cut off by a black line of roof of the old house next the abbey. The sheep and lambs are bleating in the fields away behind me, and there is a clatter of a donkey's hooves up the paved road below. The band on the pier is playing a harsh waltz in good time, and further along the quay there is a Salvation Army meeting in a back street. Neither of the bands hear the other, but up here I hear and see them both. I wonder where Jonathan is, and if he's thinking of me. I wish he were here. Dr. Seward's Diary.
5th of June. The case of Renfield grows more interesting the more I get to understand the man. He has certain qualities very largely developed: selfishness, secrecy, and purpose. I wish I could get at what is the object of the latter. He seems to have some settled scheme of his own, but what it is, I do not yet know. His redeeming quality is a love of animals, though indeed he has such curious turns in it that I sometimes imagine he is only abnormally cruel. His pets are of odd sorts. Just now his hobby is catching flies. He has at present such a quantity that I have had to myself expostulate. To my astonishment, he did not break into a fury, as I expected, but took the matter in simple seriousness. He thought for a moment and then said,
"May I have 3 days? I shall clear them away."
"Of course," I said, "that would do." I must watch him. 18th of June. He has turned his mind now to spiders, and has got several very big fellows in a box. He keeps feeding them with his flies, and the number of the latter is becoming sensibly diminished, although he has used half his food in attracting more flies from outside to his room. 1st of July. His spiders are now becoming a great nuisance, as great a nuisance as his flies, and today I told him that he must get rid of them. He looked very sad at this, so I said that he must clear out some of them, at all events. He cheerfully acquiesced in this, and I gave him the same time as before for reduction. He disgusted me much while with him, for when a horrid blowfly, bloated from some carrion food, buzzed into the room, he caught it, held it exultantly for a moment between his finger and thumb, and before I knew what he was going to do, put it in his mouth and ate it. I scolded him for it, but he argued quietly that it was very good and very wholesome, that it was life, strong life, and gave life to him. This gave me an idea, or the rudiment of one. I must watch how he gets rid of his spiders. He has evidently some deep problem in his mind, for he keeps a little notebook in which he is always jotting down something. Whole pages of it are filled with masses of figures, generally single numbers added up in batches, and then the totals added in batches again, as though he were focusing some account, as the auditors put it. 8th of July. There is a method in his madness, and the rudimentary idea in my mind is growing. It will be a whole idea soon, and then, oh, unconscious celebration, you will have to give the wall to your conscious brother. I kept away from my friend for a few days so that I might notice if there were any change. Things remain as they were, except that he has parted with some of his pets and got a new one. He has managed to get a sparrow and has already partially tamed it. His means of taming is simple, for already The spiders have diminished. Those that do remain, however, are well fed, for he still brings in the flies by tempting them with his food. 19th of